Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic page show. I really appreciate people checking out this channel. More and more folks have been commenting, so really appreciate it. At the end of the day, it's all about the movies. So, uh, you know, keep the comments coming, and always I'm always interested in feedback from people, and also always eager to talk about movies. One of the cool things that happens, and that has happened quite a bit with a lot of these videos, is the exchange of some ideas as far as recommendations, and that's really awesome. I've come across, and I've had a few folks suggest some movies and some directors that I've never, a bunch of movies I've never seen before, and also a few directors, and that's awesome. And I get comments too from some folks that subscribe to the channel or comment on the channel with about some of these movies of where they've never seen them before, so they'll watch them and then they'll kind of get back to me within the same day. So that's really really cool. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And again, one of the things that I try to do, I had somebody recently comment, which was kind of a critical comment, but I think again, it's all open. I I'm open to all kinds of feedback, whether it's positive or negative. That's fine. It doesn't ruffle my cage or anything. And again, I feel like this whole thing, for what I'm trying to do with this channel, and what the format of the show, I'm trying to always learn and try, and I'm trying to always expand on certain things. One recent uh, new subscriber had commented. He made a comment saying I had done a video yesterday on Logan's Run, which is one of the greatest sci-fi movies, and he was saying on how it wasn't until like halfway through the video I started talking about the movie. And I understand that criticism. I obviously, the main focus of these videos is to focus on the movie at hand, and I try to have that as the focus, obviously, as, the primary focus, and talking about the movie and what that movie means to me, my experiences around it, some information around that particular film, and all those kinds of things. But the reason I naturally go maybe a little bit off a little bit into the woods at times, but I try to tie in like a big picture of how my brain works, my relation to film, how it all is intertwined. Whether I talk a little bit about music, I don't usually get into personal things around my life, but sometimes I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's all, for me, from my perspective, it's all connected to the film that I'm presenting, and it's all around the lifestyle of how I live. And I realize, moving forward, or certain videos, I try to make it, try to get the focus a little bit more clear on those movies. But at the same time, I also feel natural. I feel in a pretty natural state when I try to encapsulate other things within the reviews, because it's a way of life for me. It's not really a separate thing, or like films affect me in many facets, and it's whether it's just from an inspirational standpoint, from for me writing music. It's a regular thing for me to watch a movie. It's therapeutic. It's escapism. So I don't know. I try to combine all of those things, and I realize that for some folks that could be a little bit, tedious or a little bit long-winded. But I try to. I feel like explaining things in those terms for me feels comfortable, and for me feels like a natural way of progressing with these videos. But I understand the criticism with some of those things. So, I always keep that in mind and try to, you know, realize that I still need to keep things focused. One way, too, I will explain, too, why it's all, for me, all interconnected. My love of film. I recently just started a new band with some friends. I started working at the Montessori school last year, which is a private school. They have a bunch of different locations throughout New England. There's two locations here in Maine. There's one in Camden, Maine, which is about 15 minutes away from my house, 20 minutes away. And there's also one in Belfast that just opened up. And I work in the aftercare department. I work with kids. I have a long history with working with kids. And it's an awesome job. I worked for a long time at the teen center where I worked with teenagers for a long time. And I really fell in love with that job. And now I'm kind of continuing that same path. And it's great because it's part time, and it's also a real flexible schedule for the most part. And it's all, basically it kind of caters to my weird and wacky lifestyle where I attempt to have a music career and all those things. So it's very conducive to all of that. But I recently started a band with a coworker, and it's been a blast. And it's also, I try to focus everything, the projects that I'm involved in. I try to focus everything on original, you know, uh, content. And this group is definitely doing that. And the interesting thing is the band kind of started out of us just, it's a trio, it's a power trio. And we basically started out as a thing of we were just getting together socially and having beers and talking about music and art and all these interesting things. And they're super cool people. Megan and Eddie. Eddie plays guitar and also sings, writes all the music for the band. And then Megan, who plays bass, who is my coworker at the Montessori school. We all just started getting together and having beers and hanging out. And then around that same time, they all play music also, had have lots of experience with music and bands and things like that. So we started to slowly we started jamming together basically, and then that's been going on for quite a few months. And we had a lot of the same interest in certain books, and also a lot of film interests. So after about 5 or 6 months, we realized, oh wow, I think we have like this band, and now we have a band, and it's all like original music, and it's kind of in the I don't know, it's kind of in the vein of it reminds me of like early or late '70s, early '80s New York kind of rock and roll stuff, bands like Television and stuff. Bands I would say that are, or another example would be Crazy Horse from Neil Young. That I feel like that is a sound that we kind of have. It's very punk rock. It's very rock and roll, but it has a melody and it's got a hook to it. But there's also a lot of jamming, and it's really fun. But there's a whole visual thing that's been coming along with the band, and there's Eddie put together these videos for the band, and it has this real cinematic quality. And again, I attribute my love for this new project and my enthusiasm to film. And again, that's just another kind of continuation of how much film and movies resonate with me. The biggest thing obviously being Quantum, So that's how I usually go about operating in my daily life, is having that as such a huge influence on everything, and especially in my free time and projects that I'm involved in. And to me, that's just another example of the deep love and the passion that I have for these films. So that's why I try to bring in those other things to talk about. And again, lately I've been going back into doing coverage of my favorite genre of filmmaking, and that is the exploitation world. So yesterday I did it also. Well, Logan's Run, like I mentioned, I consider that to be a sci-fi classic, but also very much part. It's very much part of the whole '70s exploitation world. I also did a review yesterday on Jesse James meets Frankenstein's Daughter, which is this totally wacky exploitation movie from 1966. So again, I always highlight that point that the exploitation world is my jam. That's my love. And today is another film that I consider to be part of that world, very much so. Uh, that is by is direct was directed by one of the greatest. I think easily one of the greatest directors ever to make film, and that is the iconic Sam Peckinpah. And the movie today is The Killer Elite with James Caan and Robert Duvall. And this amazing movie came out in 1975. This is I only have this on DVD, but it's a pretty stellar copy. It's a pretty cool transfer. I bought this. I think I bought this at Goodwill in Rockland. I typically, like I've said, when I usually buy movies, tomorrow, which is Sunday, I'm gonna be going to Bull Moose Music. I think it's supposed to be a kind of a rainy, crappy day, so a good day to go shopping and spend some cash. And I'm gonna go to Bull Moose probably in Waterville, which is my favorite shop to go. So, and when I go there, I try to only seek out the exploitation movies because they have a really great selection. And I feel it's like there's a sense when I go or when I buy these movies that I'm kind of under the clock a little bit, and I the way I the reason I think in those terms is I feel like there's all these great gems that have been released through all of these various small companies, Mondo Macabra and Severin and Blue Underground. But I feel like we're in this renaissance. If you're a collector and lover of exploitation movies, we're in this amazing period right now, and it's kind of this renaissance, and it's been going on for a good chunk of years, especially the last 3 to 5 years. And the titles that have been coming out through these labels has just been incredible. But I also feel it might go away. It might just disappear someday. I think the fan base for myself included, for a lot of these films will for the most part remain intact. It's a small bunch of film lunatics out there that love these films, but it's a sizable force. It's a group I of people out there that are really passionate about the movies, and I feel like a lot of these companies are making a lot of money off of these underground movies, but it's small and pretty underground for the most part. But there's this renaissance and there's a demand. But I feel with the digital age and things that we're living in that it could go away because I don't know how realistically it can sustain itself, but we'll see. But I've seen these weird ebb and flows as far as available titles. I don't really order things online. I pretty much go and buy things in person. So there's an increased enthusiasm to try to get as many of these movies as I can in their physical form because I have this sense that they could go away someday. So typically when I go there, I to Bull Moose, that's what I seek out. And then when I go to Goodwill, the other shop I love to go to is the Goodwill in Rockland, Maine. I typically buy the more big budget Hollywood movies that I also love. And I try to only buy, I don't really buy DVDs anymore. It's very rare. I do. Every now and then I come across the title of a movie that, is something that is really good, or it's a great collection. One of the last ones that I bought that was a DVD that I still haven't watched yet, but it was a Criterion collection, was Terry Gilliam's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with Johnny Depp. Amazing movie, about Hunter S. Thompson. So directed by by the amazing Terry Gilliam, and they had, when I was in Goodwill a few months ago, they had that on DVD, but it was the Criterion collection, and it came with or it comes with 2 discs. I haven't watched yet, but it's a beautiful package, and it was super cheap, like $2. So I snatched that up. So, on occasion I buy DVDs, but it's becoming less and less of a thing. What I try to always buy now are Blu-rays, and especially like good, maybe special editions of Blu-rays, especially if they have a good package. They come with lots of special features. But I bought the Killer Elite a few years back, and I found this in Goodwill in Rockland. They don't really have a very good selection when it comes to the real kind of low budget exploitation movies. Occasionally, I find I've found a couple of movies, but generally they don't have much of a selection as far as that style. But this movie is just incredible, and Sam Peckinpah, like I said, is one of the best. You know, he was one of the most creative forces, in cinema. Easily one of the best directors, I think, in history of film. In 1969, he directed the Wild Bunch, which is one of the most iconic westerns ever. Super brutal, and I believe it's been remade once or twice, but the original is so incredible. Probably my favorite Sam Peckinpah film is Straw Dogs with Dustin Hoffman, which came out in 1971. That movie is one of the most brutal and also one of the most gritty movies I've ever seen. I've seen that movie a bunch of times. I unfortunately don't own it. I need to buy that movie. I've seen it a bunch of times, and I love that movie to death. It is such a brutal movie. It's a really hard movie to watch at times because there's a very notorious rape scene in that movie, but it is such a brutal movie, but just such a great character study. Dustin Hoffman is just fire in that movie. That's probably my favorite Sam Peckinpah film. Um, the Killer Elite is up there too, and of course the Wild Bunch. He also did Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid in 1973, which is another killer movie. The Getaway in 1972, again another classic film by Sam Peckinpah. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, another amazing film. I'd like to revisit that movie. I haven't seen that in a very long time. That came out in '74. Sam Peckinpah was very prolific in the '70s. I believe he died of cancer in the late '80s, but he really burned an amazing path in the world of filmmaking. For a good two, this late '60s through the '70s and part of the '80s. He just really left an amazing legacy. I've seen him talked a lot about where over the years I've seen interviews with Quentin Tarantino, and he always talks about constantly brings up directors like Brian De Palma and also Sam Peckinpah as being, you know, two of the most important directors ever in American history, as far as just the incredible body of work that they, have done throughout the years. Cross of Iron, which came out in '77, which is another amazing movie. King Dundee, so many great films. Convoy in 1978, yet again another killer movie. Ride the High Country in 1962. The Ballad of Cable Hogue in 1970, which is a pretty badass western. Junior Boner, Junior Bonner, 1972, and then of course Killer Elite in 1975. The Osterman Weekend in 1983, which is an awesome movie. That is a movie I definitely want to get eventually on Blu-ray. A lot of his movies I need to get. I don't own a lot of Sam Peckinpah movies, which is pretty pretty pathetic, but I've seen a lot of his films. The Deadly Companions in 1961, One-Eyed Jacks, which is another killer western, 61. In- Invasion of the Body Snatchers, he was responsible for the original in 56. The Visitor, which is another bonkers kind of exploitation movie, in 79. The Glory Days in 65. Heaven's Gate in 1980. Just so many great films that he directed. Just one of the greatest. You can't go wrong. This movie, The Killer Elite, is such a crazy movie. I definitely feel like out of most of his movies, I also think of Straw Dogs as kind of being in the exploitation world, just because of how gritty the film is and just how raw it is, and it's kind of a sleazy movie, particularly around the rape scene, which is like pretty hardcore, and I think for most people it would be pretty hard to watch. Uh, Sam Peckinpah is known for his use of violence in a lot of his films. His films always have these really gritty characters, multi-layered stories, great characters, but he's really known to be one of those directors that really was not afraid to show violence on the big screen. And his films, for the most part, were relatively low budget, and I feel like that really a lot of those characteristics, particularly Straw Dogs and especially the Killer Elite, because it's a little bit more wacky, and uh, it's got this real crazy plot twist in the film that I feel like it definitely qualifies as kind of an exploitation movie. The whole premise of the story is pretty awesome and so utterly original. There was actually a remake of this film starring Robert De Niro, which was not very good. That came out in the I think like about maybe 8 years ago. Friends George Hansen, Robert Duvall, and Mike Locken, played by James Caan, are hitmen who do contract jobs for a company called Comtag. They're associated with the CIA. When George gets an offer from the competition, he turns on Mike, breaking his elbow and shoulder. It takes Mike a long time and a lot of physical therapy to get back to his job, but he does. And he eventually finds himself protecting a client who Handsome and his gang are also being paid to assassinate. And this film is like has lots of espionage. It's kind of like a spy thriller, but there's all of these great action sequences. There's also this whole thing of where uh, there's all these ninjas in a couple of these like fight scenes, which is just wild. Like these ninjas all appear out of nowhere, and there's this whole really awesome scene on this in this harbor area where there's all of this combat taking place where these boats are, and all of these like ninja, basically these ninja assassins appear, and it's totally bonkers and crazy, and it's just great. It's such an entertaining movie. I'm a huge fan of Robert Duvall and especially James Caan. Of course, they were both in my favorite movie of all time, The Godfather. So many great films that both of these iconic directors have been in over the years. This is one of their best movies, and again, the storyline is pretty wacky, super gritty, it's super violent, it's kind of silly at times, but it's just raw, and it's got this like that classic violence that only Peckinpah can bring to the big screen. And I never really hear this movie as popular as Sam Peckinpah is, and as highly regarded as he is, and rightfully so. I don't really hear this movie discussed all that much. Usually, people talk a lot about The Wild Bunch. Like that's the movie that kind of was probably his most popular and his most successful commercially. And also, the Straw Dogs is also a film that is a movie that is talked about, and rightfully so, because I think that's probably my favorite Peckinpah movie. They also made a remake. There was also a remake of that, which was terrible. Really sanitized version. Like there's no, they cut out the whole rape scene, and the violence is pretty scaled back. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing is that it just feels like a classic. Killer Elite just feels like a classic '70s movie. It's just got that grit to it, and that low budget, trashy kind of vibe, and that's my some of those are my some of my favorite characteristics in the world of exploitation, and that's kind of why I consider this to be part of that world. Such a great movie, and I think it's as great, and with James Caan and Robert Duvall, all of the incredible movies that they've been in. I feel like this might be one of their best films together. I can't think of other movies that they were in aside from The Godfather, where they were in the film together. But just an amazing movie. I highly recommend it. If you like real gritty thrillers, with espionage and spies and ninjas, this is the movie for you. Um, I can't recommend it enough. 1975, classic Sam Peckinpah. And eventually, I haven't come across it, but I'm sure it exists. But I haven't seen this yet on Blu-ray. It would be awesome. I'm sure the transfer would be great. I'm sure there's a really wonderful edition out there. And in my travels, at some point, I'm sure I'll come across it. So this is Jason Dean, Film Fanatic. So if you like this channel, please subscribe and keep the comments coming, and definitely check out this movie. It's a wild ride. It's a pretty cool introduction. If you've never seen a Sam Peckinpah movie, I think this would be a good one. Like start with the more low budget kind of films that he did, and then work your way up. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.